SCP-173 is an anomaly that, when left out of sight, will happily terminate anyone it can get its hands on. Of course, we can always directly observe the statue, which immobilizes it completely, but this is a temporary solution. What if we could permanently stop SCP-173 from attacking people ever again? In this video, we try to defeat SCP-173. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel with notifications on, so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, and we will be exploring more interesting SCP-173 experiments like this one in the future. When we think of ways to defeat SCP-173, the first thing that comes to mind is SCP-131. As most of you probably know, 131, also called the iPods, are a pair of teardrop-shaped creatures roughly 1 foot in height, with a single blue eye in the middle of their bodies. But despite of having an eye, the SCP-131 subjects have never been observed to blink, even in laboratories when they have been videotaped for hours. At the base of each creature is a wheel-like protrusion which allows them to move, and the subjects are surprisingly quick. Also, the SCP-131 instances do not require any care from staff, as they do not eat, leave droppings, or even sleep. The iPods have the intelligence of common house cats and are very curious, which is why they spend most of the time rolling around the facility, observing personnel at work and catching peeks at other safe-class SCPs. And comparing them to house cats is made more appropriate by the fact that the SCP-131 subjects respond well to any affection given to them, and quickly bond to the giver of said affection, in the same way a pet bonds with a human being. And having bonded with somebody, they will follow that person anywhere, even into normally restricted areas. Although curious, the subjects can sense danger in their general vicinity, and if the object of their bond begins to approach something they register as dangerous, for example a Keter-class anomaly, they will swarm around their companion's feet while babbling in a panicked tone, as if to warn them. And we see why we would think of SCP-131 when it comes to defeating the concrete statue. The 131 instances have eyes and never blink, so theoretically, if we make them stand in front of 173, the statue would never be able to move. In fact, something similar has already happened in the SCP Foundation, because on one occasion, the iPods followed one of the cleaning staff on a routine cleaning of the container of SCP-173. Of course, sensing danger, they swarmed around the prisoner's feet while babbling in an attempt to warn the D-Class about the statue, but they were ignored, which is why the creatures rushed into the container and positioned themselves between 173 and the cleaners. Once inside, they sat in front of SCP-173 and watched it intently, as if aware it could only move if unobserved. When the cleaning personnel left, the subjects did as well, rolling backwards slowly and never taking their eyes off of 173. So as we see, using the iPods to defeat the statue is definitely a viable short-term solution. However, we can't make the iPods observe 173 forever, because this would be the equivalent of making your dog sit and stare at something non-stop. The dog would eventually get bored, and at some point, it would refuse to cooperate. Of course, the 131 instances don't require any sustenance, so we can always make a device that holds the iPods in one place, so that their eyes always point towards SCP-173, but we must not forget that the creatures are anomalous, so this could have unexpected consequences. For example, they could begin blinking as a way of protest, and they could get sick and expire because of the stress we would inflict on them if we did this, and so on, not to mention that this would be downright immoral. So unfortunately, the iPods are going to have to remain a short-term solution. But this doesn't mean we can't use them alongside another anomaly, forming an SCP combination that could help us permanently defeat SCP-173. As you already know, SCP-999 is an anomalous blob of orange slime that greatly enjoys playing with humans, and the Teco monster can cure depression and PTSD in a matter of seconds. But SCP-999 is a lot more powerful than it appears, because this cute blob of slime temporarily cured SCP-62 of its hatred. We won't go into detail why, because we discussed this in detail in our last video, but in short, SCP-999 is the grandchild of the most powerful deity known to the Foundation, the Scarlet King, a literal devil that wants to destroy the entire universe. But the Tickle monster isn't any ordinary grandchild, because it does not support its grandfather and actually wants to defeat the Red King by curing him of his hatred. Of course, some of you might say that the Tickle monster won't be able to cure SCP-173 because 173 is a statue that isn't alive, and in SCP-999's wiki article, it is stated that the Tickle monster can only affect living beings. However, SCP-173's appearance is deceiving because the statue is actually alive. We won't go into too much detail because we've already made 2 videos about the statue's origin, but in short, SCP-173 was brought to life by an SCP group of interest using a complex ritual, similar to the ritual used to create a golem in Jewish folklore. But back to the topic at hand. SCP-173 is actually alive, and based on the fact that 999 temporarily cured SCP-682, one of the most hateful anomalies in the Foundation, then the Tickle monster definitely has a good chance at curing the statue as well. But if SCP-999 could cure 173 on its own, then why did we introduce SCP-131 in the first place? Well, the reason for this is a very common misconception regarding the Tickle monster, namely the fact that SCP-999 probably doesn't have a pair of eyes. Everyone imagines the Tickle monster with a pair of eyes, and all art pieces of the anomaly depict it in the same way, but in its wiki entry, nothing is stated about it having eyes. And SCP-999's wiki entry is quite thorough, so it is hard to imagine the Foundation would omit such an important fact in its description. Of course, if SCP-999 doesn't have eyes, and we introduce the Tickle monster to 173's containment chamber, then the statue will be able to move freely, and will probably choose to avoid the Tickle monster's attacks by moving around it. The statue may even decide to attack 999. Of course, the Tickle monster probably won't be injured or terminated by 173, given the fact that 999 is an anomalous blob of slime and doesn't have a neck that can be crunched, and that it survived being stepped on by SCP-682. But still, SCP-999 requires physical contact in order for its cheerful effect to take place, as stated in its wiki entry. And if the statue keeps avoiding the Tickle monster's attempts to hug it, then SCP-999 can't have an effect on 173, which is where SCP-131 comes into play. All we need to do is use SCP-999 and 131 simultaneously, and we have a real chance at defeating 173. First off, we will need to bring SCP-999 and 131 together before we introduce them to the statue. This is because we want the iPods to become attached to the Tickle monster, because if they are, they will want to protect 999 from SCP-173 in the same way they protected the D-Class during the last incident. Of course, bringing together 2 of the friendliest and most adorable creatures in the Foundation is going to be immensely cute, and upon feeling SCP-999's touch for the first time, the iPods are going to experience euphoria like never before. As a result, the SCP-131 creatures are probably going to start running around, babbling joyfully, as they usually do when they are excited. When they eventually calm down, SCP-999 will use this moment to capture them and begin its favorite activity, tickle wrestling. All in all, this without a doubt will become the cutest experiment in the entire Foundation history. But most importantly, the Tickle monster and the iPods will have bonded together and will now be ready to face SCP-173. We will need to capture them and bring them into the statue's containment chamber, as they probably won't enter on their own will, but this won't be a problem, considering their size. Once inside, the iPods are going to try and protect the Tickle monster from the statue, just like we intended. The 131 instances will line up and keep their eyes on 173, keeping the statue in one place. And of course, SCP-999 won't be afraid of 173 because the Tickle monster wasn't afraid of SCP-682 in the slightest, and the statue isn't nearly as threatening as the reptile. Instead, SCP-999 will approach the statue with curiosity and will be happy to hug 173 in an attempt to cure the statue of its aggression. Of course, there's no guarantee SCP-999 will permanently rid the statue of its desire to crunch necks, but given the Tickle monster's origin and immense capabilities, and the fact that it temporarily cured the most aggressive monster in the Foundation, SCP-682, then SCP-999 will likely turn 173 into a friendly statue right then and there. As a result, SCP-173 will stop crunching people's necks and will either turn into a stationary statue or will continue moving around, but will hug people instead. And should the Tickle monster's powers prove too weak to turn 173 friendly at first, then we only need to wait for SCP-999's capabilities to fully develop and simply repeat the experiment, because it turns out that SCP-999 is a lot more powerful than it appears to be, and it's only a matter of time before we can use it to cure every single aggressive monster in the Foundation as well. So what do you think? Would SCP-999 permanently cure 173 of its aggression? And which SCP experiment should we explore next? Let us know in the comments. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming SCP videos.